Girl by Lois Abraham. Jill was the only girl who had ever run away from the circus. The only one she had ever heard of, anyway. Many a 17-year-old towner had fallen for one of the roustabouts for his gypsy good looks and strong arms, or for a performer whose job, after all, was to take the breath away. A girl like that would make a tour or two as a follower, a possum-belly queen, as the older people might say, part of the scene, but never part of the family. Then she would drop off the train somewhere, maybe a better place than she had come from, maybe worse, probably pretty much the same. But Jill had taken the other route. She had always assumed that she would be on the show for her whole life. Both of her parents were zanies, and she knew the props and the moves like knowing how to breathe. But in her heart, she didn't think they were all that funny or interesting. Instead, the uncostumed, bare-faced audience fascinated her. What their lives must be like, the simplicity she saw in their expressions as they turned simultaneously at the ringmaster's command or a blast of fanfare and looked where their attention was directed. The innocence of what their homes must be compared to the animal stink and drama and buzzing energy of life on the road, where the show went on and she was never alone. When her lack of interest in the clown act was too obvious to overlook, first her concerned parents and then the gaffer had tried to talk some sense into her. As a kind of corrective measure, she had been sent out with the butcher crew during the come-in to sell programs, peanuts, and cotton candy from Oliver Mack's cotton candy stand. With her wares on a tray in front of her, she would pass through the crowd as they pushed towards the big top, pitching whenever she remembered to, trying to see what made these people so different. Then on the last night, the home sweet home performance of the tour, she spotted Reuben, blonde, crew-cut, freckled, a perfect town boy. He didn't even glance at her, but she liked his scrubbed good looks, so she followed him in and saw him sit down in the stringers to watch the clowns and wait for the main events. As she circled the tent, she kept an eye on him. She saw that he was alone, and the way he scooted over to make room for a couple with a little boy, not intruding, but making himself available for conversation, told her he was lonely. Once the show actually came on, she gave up her half-hearted attempt to sell and watched him stare with wide-eyed wonder at the exotic animals, the bareback riders, the aerialists, and the acrobats, glancing over once in a while to enjoy how the little boy was reacting. When the final act was finished and the ringmaster was declaring the evening a wild success in an accent fabricated to simulate a bigger, grander version of town talk, he stood up and headed for the exit, still alone, hanging back to let some older ladies stay together as they made their slow way out. She drifted behind him as far as the arch where the crowd had thinned out, and then he turned and faced her. "How come you're following me?" he asked. His eyes were narrowed into a suspicious squint, and she realized he thought she was going to pick his pocket or trip him up somehow. She couldn't think of what to say, so she offered him a pink pillow of cotton candy on a cardboard stick. He shook his head, no thanks. "It's free," she said. "I'm giving it to you." Reuben took the offering and pulled off a sticky wad. He put it in his mouth, and she wanted more than anything to follow it, to be sweet in that intimate space. He offered her a piece, and instead of reaching for it, she opened her mouth and let it place it on her tongue, where it melted and spread and disappeared. "That over there," he said, "is my red truck. If you want, come with me and we can go for a little ride. I'll bring you back whenever you say." She set down her tray of circus goods in the mud at the edge of the lot and followed him, not once looking back. The circus left town without her. It might have been that night, or maybe the next one, that she got pregnant. When they found out Reuben changed in ways Jill hadn't anticipated and didn't understand. He no longer joked with her or played at tickling in the mornings to pull her into lovemaking. He insisted that they marry as soon as possible so there couldn't be any gossip to cloud this child's sunny future. His folks, Nancy and Bob, were too sick to come down from Stockton, though they lent Reuben the down payment on a little run-down house, and her parents, Gloriana and Willie, were already at ease in Florida, planning the next season's act. Jill and Reuben were both 18, so they just got married at the county clerk's office with his cousin and a buddy from work as witnesses. Reuben picked up another job just part-time on Saturdays, 10 to closing at the hardware store, and worked like a demon at his regular 8 to 5 at the lumberyard, picking up any overtime he could get. The baby was going to cost. Jill tried to find a job herself to help out and pay for the impending hospital bill, but her big belly and her lack of the kind of experience rare owners of local businesses had any use for made it impossible. "You don't have to work," Reuben told her. "I'll take care of it. You just stay at home and get ready for the baby." She checked out all the library books on being a parent she could find and read them to him over his dinner, or when he fell into bed exhausted. He tried to listen, but her voice was so soft and pleasant that his eyes glazed over and then closed. She watched him sleep, his head so deeply sunk into the pillow, face painted with a film of fatigue, the tiny lines around his eyes making him look not older, but like a desperate boy driven by a man's fate. Even though he fell asleep, he encouraged her to keep reading, afraid that even if he did his part, she wouldn't know how to take care of the baby. "Let's face it," he told her. "Gloriana may be an interesting person and all that, but she wasn't much of a mother. I mean, she was just a clown after all. I don't mean any disrespect, she probably didn't know any better." He pictured a big-haired, painted-faced clown handing the crying baby that had been Jill off to another horn-playing, daffy, red-nosed fool to comfort, who would pass her on to a bearded woman wrapped in snakes. His imagination was not far from the truth. He thought sometimes from the look on Jill's face that she might have calliope music running through her mind. It made him nervous now that the baby was coming. He still thought of her as an exotic, a mermaid he had brought home and now had to cope with. She might not know how to raise a child in the real world. Towards the end of the pregnancy, Jill's legs became numb and swollen, and her blood pressure went up too high, according to the doctor at the free clinic. During the weeks that followed, she lay in bed while Reuben took over the housework, in addition to everything else he had tackled. She was amused at the way he went about it, buying different, presumably superior bathroom cleanser like his mom had always used, and a pair of enormous yellow rubber gloves he wore to wash dishes and left neatly pinned together with a clothespin hung over the little rack with the dish towels. When Stephen James arrived, he was a wonderful baby, handsome and sturdy. He was a difficult baby, cranky and wakeful. And even though he was helpless, Jill had the feeling he knew this was only a temporary state of affairs. Things would be different as soon as he figured out what was going on. He slept much less than she had thought he would, and she was awake many nights with his interminable ear infections and bouts of bronchitis, trying to keep him still, to give Reuben his sleep. The quiet nights of holding him in her arms, watching him suck on her brown nipple and grow quiet himself under the influence of the warm milk, gave her the strength to continue even as it wrapped her in a blanket of fatigue. She felt like a metallic substance was running sluggishly in her veins, heavy and alienating. Reuben was proud of his little son. He watched Jill anxiously when he was home to be sure she was handling the baby right. But he had to go to work every morning, leaving her to fumble through the day, trying to sleep whenever Stevie slept. He worried that her days was depression, like in the books, and worried most of all that she would do something dangerous and hurt the baby, accidentally, subconsciously, or on purpose. "Why do you let him cry?" he asked. "Why don't you go get him?" "He just needs to cry, I guess. If I comfort him and then put him down, he just cries again. I can't find any way to get him to sleep without crying, so I just let him cry. I can't stop him, you know. He just cries sometimes." Reuben was concerned and searched through the pile of past-due childcare books that were always out, usually left open to the last page consulted, where they had looked up diaper rash, colic, and teething. Most of the authors were clear that babies should not be left to cry. Then he found where Dr. Spock said that some babies cried when whined and to let them. He didn't tell Jill what he had found, and he continued to worry anyway. The sound of crying was a trial to him, especially when Stevie's voice cracked with what sounded to Reuben like inexpressible, impotent, primal rage. Just as Stevie's first teeth began to emerge from the rosy gums, he became ill once again, this time with diarrhea that was far worse than the side effect of teething listed in the books. His slimy diapers needed changing several times an hour, and he nursed listlessly or not at all. Jill was up almost all night with him, holding him as he wailed or slept briefly, and woke to fuss again. In the morning, she was roused by the sound of toast popping up as Reuben fixed himself breakfast. The baby woke up at the same time, and she started to change his diaper, then realized it was dry. She packed him into his little plastic baby seat and went into the kitchen to consult with Reuben. Reuben, he seems really sick. He nursed a little in the night, but I think we need to call the doctor. Stevie, sat in his baby seat on the kitchen counter, was grim and unusually silent. As Reuben went to call, she leaned her tired body against the softly vibrating refrigerator, wanting to embrace it with her arms and rest her head on its top, but it was too high to reach. She could hear Reuben's voice, vital and warm, in the other room as he talked to the clinic. When he came back, he seemed energized and full of adrenaline, authorized, ready to meet the challenge. We have to get some liquid into him, or he'll have to go to the hospital. He's dehydrating, and if he goes 24 hours without drinking anything, we need to check him in. They said give him flat 7-Up or chipped ice if he doesn't want to drink. We don't have any, she said. I'll go get some. You finish packing my lunch for me, and I'll go get some, okay? Lunch? Jesus Christ, just wait here. I'll be back in a minute. He left shaking his head, rattling the keys in his pocket, moving so quickly that it took her a moment to realize he was gone. It took her a moment to regain her balance. Stevie was fussing and wriggling in his seat. She tried to get him to take water out of a spoon, but he turned his head away and glared at her. Reuben's open lunchbox caught her attention, and she began mechanically to pack it with an apple out of the refrigerator and a peanut butter sandwich while Stevie cried. When Reuben returned bringing the necessary supplies, he set them on the counter next to Stevie with an air of a man getting ready to change a tire. He emptied the ginger ale into a jar and shook it briskly to get the bubbles out. You hold him and I'll get it down him, he ordered. Hold him? She was unsure and felt unable to keep up. I hold him? Just hold his head, he said, dipping some of the liquid into a spoon. She held Stevie's smooth little face between her hands so that when he turned his face to avoid the spoon, her hands turned with him. Hold him still. She took a firmer grip and held his face still as Reuben tried to pry his tightly buttoned mouth open. Stevie opened his mouth to protest, and Reuben slipped the spoon in. There, he said, but the baby had inhaled most of the liquid and began to choke convulsively, his face red and his eyes panicked. She took him out of the infant seat and held him with his face down, patting him on the back. When he stopped coughing, he cried in earnest, and the fear and anger in his voice set Reuben off. Hold him, he said again. He seemed angry, backing up and balancing back and forth on his feet like a boxer. When she had set the frantic baby down again in the infant seat, Reuben stepped forward and seized a wooden spoon, putting it sideways in the wailing mouth to hold it open. Hold him still, he yelled, and his eyes were so dangerous and unfamiliar that she obeyed him instinctively. She held the screaming baby against the seat while Reuben poured the ginger ale down his throat, setting off another bout of choking, which culminated in gagging and vomiting up the little bit of milk he had taken during the night. She saw a small trickle of blood where the spoon had broken open his perfect little mouth. This can't be right, she pleaded, picking up their hysterical baby and holding him close. She wanted to put her hand over his mouth to silence the noise that was making her ears hum. Are you going to let him die because you're too weak to hold him down? You have to do it. Do it. Hold him again. Just hold him down. I can't, she yelled over the baby's goblin shriek. He's bleeding. This can't be right. You don't get it, Reuben explained loudly. If he doesn't drink, he'll die. Don't you understand that? No. What they said is if he doesn't drink for 24 hours, he'll go to the hospital. Isn't that what they said? Not that he'll die. Do you want him to go to the hospital? Do you really think that's going to be good for him? Do you have any idea what that's going to cost? She couldn't think think well enough to reason and be careful at the same time. It's better than having your dad pry you open with a spoon, she said. She thought for a moment that Reuben was going to hit her, but he hit the wall instead, cracking the plaster next to her head. She was suddenly aware that she didn't know what to do. Not just about the baby, but about Reuben. About being here in this hard little house with this yelling man. She didn't even know how to continue to do the wrong thing. The two people she was closest to were both shrieking at her, both red-faced and upset. The baby's face was caked with a mixture of vomit, snot, and tears, and her husband's spit was hitting her face as he yelled. She was still except for her hand, which continued to stroke Stevie's back rhythmically. "Give it some time," she said. "They said 24 hours. Please, Reuben. I don't know what to do, but if he doesn't get better by noon, I'll call you. We're going to be late. You're going to be late for work. It'll be okay. Really." She tried to get closer to Reuben, to give him the comfort of her warm body for a moment, to calm him, but he shoved her roughly away. "How can you ask me to let him die?" he said. "He's my son." "But it's not like that. It'll be okay," she said. "It really will. He's starting to calm down already. Maybe he'll get hungry." "You say it'll be okay, but you don't know anything about it. You don't know anything about what's real." "Let's give it till noon. Call me at noon and I'll do whatever you say. I can't hold him down. Then I'll take him to the hospital or whatever you say. Just let him calm down. Give me till noon." "God damn you," he said, although he didn't usually cuss, and turned on his heel, slamming his way out of the house. Jill set Stevie back in the infant seat where he began to wind down, and she sat on the kitchen stool and studied him. After a while, he quieted and returned her gaze. The house seemed especially still in the aftermath of the shouting, like when show ended and left the performers cold and sore and tired. "Okay, Steve-O," she said. "What the hell do we do now?" Stevie didn't answer. His round blue eyes were still wet with tears, and the look on his face was baleful and severe. The cut in his mouth had stopped bleeding and had already begun to heal. He began to cry again. "I don't suppose you'd care for a drink?" she asked, imagining a large bottle of whiskey and feeling her own tears rise for the first time. "I can't do this," she said. "This is something I can't do." Her eyes wandered around the familiar kitchen, looking for inspiration among the pots and pans, the lunchbox Reuben had forgotten to take, the dish soap on the windowsill in front of the polka dot curtains, the yellow gloves hanging so neatly on the rack. On an impulse, she unpinned them and drew them over her shaking hands, hoping to feel something about Reuben, to hold his hands, to be held. Then she held her hands open, fingers spread on either side of her face, wiggling her head to make a big, fake smile. The baby fell silent at this. With her big yellow clown hands, she dipped up some ginger ale in a spoon and offered it to Stevie. When he saw the enormous bright blob of color swooping towards his face, his jaw dropped and he swallowed the liquid automatically. Intent on reading and making sense of this unfamiliar phenomenon, like nothing he had seen before. A dense yellow cloud, like a kite, like an oracle, smelling mysterious, intense, meaningful. It sailed toward him. Over and over, he watched the unprecedented yellow hand make the trip away and back, and he continued to swallow, entranced. She was quiet, except for the tune she whispered just under her breath. Toot, 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 toot. She let Stevie focus wholly on the astounding gloves, careful not to break the spell. When he had taken in a cup or so, he lost interest. So she wiped his face with a warm, wet cloth and kissed his firm cheeks. She picked him up and lay down with him on the couch, where he began rooting at her front. She opened her nightgown and gave him her breast, and as he nursed, she let herself relax and fall asleep. The last sound she was aware of was the very faint hiss of Stevie's pee hitting the dry diaper. They both slept, and when Reuben came home for his lunch at noon, apprehensive and determined, he found them there and knew that it was all right, and felt obscurely that it was all wrong.